There is a moment no one prepares you for. Not when things fall apart, but when they stop working. When the things you once used to disappear no longer help you vanish. When distraction fails. When pleasure loses its magic. When effort feels empty. When even your favorite escapes can no longer protect you from your own mind. That moment does not arrive with noise. It arrives with a strange quiet. A kind of inner exhaustion that does not come from doing too much, but from running from something too long. You may not call it tiredness, you may call it boredom, depression, confusion, restlessness, burnout. But beneath every label is the same experience. Something in you is tired of leaving yourself behind. This is not the tiredness of the body, and it is not the fatigue of the intellect. This is the weariness of a soul that has carried too many masks, swallowed too many truths, and survived too many days by becoming smaller than it truly is. This is the kind of exhaustion that sleep does not cure, the kind that vacations cannot fix, the kind that pleasure only postpones. And when that tiredness appears, it is not your enemy. It is your first honest signal. Because for the first time in your life, escape does not feel like freedom anymore. It feels like weight. Relief feels brief. Distraction feels shallow. Noise feels heavy. Even joy feels thin. And beneath all of it, a voice begins to rise. Quiet, persistent, uncomfortable. It does not scream. It whispers. It says something unsettling. It says you can no longer pretend. The soul does not break when it is wounded. It breaks when it is ignored. And the strange thing about that moment when escape stops working is this. Nothing outside of you changes. Your job might still be the same. Your relationships may look identical. Your routines may continue. But inside, a shift begins. You are no longer contained by the life you built to avoid yourself. You begin to see through the habits you once used to survive. And what once felt normal now feels unbearable. This is the edge, not of collapse, of confrontation. Because the same system that once numbed your pain is now exposing it. The same escapes that once soothed you are now reminding you of what you have not faced. And slowly, something becomes clear. You are not exhausted from living. You are exhausted from not being present in your own life. This is not a motivational speech. It is a moment of truth. There is a point at which the soul grows tired of negotiating with illusions. Tired of anesthetics masquerading as healing. Tired of pleasures that soothe the surface while leaving the wound untouched. Tired of waking up each day already halfway gone. And at that point, something shifts from within you. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Running begins to cost more than staying. Numbness becomes heavier than pain, and comfort begins to feel emptier than truth. This is where your real journey begins. Not when you feel ready, not when you feel strong, but when you feel tired in a way that cannot be solved by running anymore. This is the moment the soul stops asking for more escapes and starts asking for honesty. There comes a quiet realization that follows exhaustion, a subtle understanding that you do not notice at first because it does not arrive with drama. It arrives with weight, a strange heaviness in simple moments, a resistance in getting out of bed, a dull ache behind the desire to be busy. You begin to feel it when even standing still feels safer than chasing something else. When you sit alone and realize that doing nothing now feels less painful than doing everything for reasons you no longer believe in. This is not laziness. This is not failure. This is the paradox of emotional exhaustion. You did not grow weak from feeling too much. You grew tired from not allowing yourself to feel at all. Avoiding emotion requires constant effort, a continuous tightening of the mind, a subtle tension in the body that never truly releases. When you deny yourself grief, you carry it in your shoulders. When you swallow anger, it tightens your throat. When you betray your truth, your chest becomes a cage. And you walk through your life like this, clenched, guarded, surviving. Running takes energy, more than standing still ever could. Every distraction requires maintenance. Every lie demands reinforcement. Every mask needs adjustment. Every identity built for acceptance has to be protected, and over time, this hidden effort drains you, slowly, quietly, invisibly, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer have the strength to perform. The soul does not speak in words when it is exhausted. It speaks in a feeling of resistance, in the sudden loss of interest in things that once excited you, in the inability to care as deeply as you used to, in the urge to withdraw from what no longer resonates. The body grows heavy not because life is heavy, but because you are living a life that does not fit you anymore. Standing still begins to feel like relief, not because you are healed, but because you are finally listening. When you run long enough, movement itself becomes punishment, not freedom. And slowing down feels like a rebellion against everything that taught you to distract instead of to face. Stillness starts to feel dangerous because it reveals what movement concealed. This is when restlessness transforms. It is no longer about wanting more. It becomes about wanting out of noise, out of pretense, out of pressure, out of a life that only makes sense from the outside. The exhaustion you feel now is not the end of your strength. It is the end of your tolerance for a life that is not aligned. And a strange thing happens in this stage. You begin to crave silence. You withdraw from stimulation. You feel irritated by small talk. You grow impatient with meaningless effort. Not because you are becoming cold, but because you are becoming honest. Your nervous system is no longer willing to support a life that costs you your soul. And when you stop running, something uncomfortable is revealed. You are not escaping pain. You are escaping yourself. But now, standing still no longer feels like failure. It feels like the beginning of truth. You were taught a dangerous equation long before you ever questioned it. That relief means healing. That pleasure means progress. That if something feels good, it must be good for you. And if something hurts, it must be avoided. But this belief quietly built a cage inside your life, because it trained you to chase sensations instead of understanding them, to soothe symptoms instead of seeking meaning. Pleasure was never meant to save you. It was meant to be experienced, not depended on. The lie you absorbed was subtle. It did not announce itself. It whispered through culture, through advertising, through stories that promise fulfillment in consumption, in distraction, in indulgence. It taught you that discomfort is an error to be erased, that sadness is a malfunction, that anxiety is an enemy, that boredom is a flaw. And so you learned to reach for something every time a feeling rose. A screen, a substance, a fantasy, a craving, a person, a routine. Anything but the truth of what you were actually experiencing. But pleasure, when used as refuge, does not heal. It numbs. You do not become lighter through pleasure. You become quieter inside, temporarily. You do not escape the wound. You only delay the moment you must meet it. And the body knows the difference between joy and anesthesia. One expands you, the other silences you. What you call addiction often begins as self-soothing. It is not born from weakness. It is born from a nervous system that never learned how to feel safely. From a childhood that did not make space for emotion. From a world that taught you to perform instead of to process. So you reached for something that worked, and for a while it did. Pleasure did take the edge off. It did soften the load. It did grant you distance from feelings that felt too big to hold. That is why it becomes dangerous. Not because it fails immediately, but because it succeeds too well. It convinces you that you are healing when you are only hiding. And slowly, you begin to protect the very thing that keeps you numb. You defend your escapes like lifelines, not realizing they are the cords tying you to a version of yourself that no longer wants to exist. The moment you dare question pleasure is the moment you threaten the loop, because you begin to see that the habit is not the villain. The reason you need it is, and that realization is terrifying. If pleasure is not the answer, then what is? If distraction is not salvation, then what remains? Silence. And silence is where everything you have avoided is waiting. Not to punish you, to be felt. At the heart of every compulsion lives a quiet grief. Not always dramatic, not always visible, but always real. A sorrow that was never given shape. An ache that never found language. a goodbye you were never allowed to say, a loss you were never allowed to mourn. Most people think addiction is built on desire, but it is built on absence. Something was taken from you long before you reached for comfort, a sense of safety, a feeling of being seen, a space where your true self was allowed to breathe. And because it left silently, you never learned how to name it. You only felt its void. So you filled it, not with intention, but with instinct, not with clarity, but with urgency. Uncried tears do not disappear. They migrate. They move into patterns, into habits, into behaviors that seem irrational until you understand the grief beneath them. Every craving hides a farewell. Every obsession carries a memory. Every compulsion whispers the story of something unfinished. It may have been a childhood that ended too early, a parent who was emotionally absent, a dream you were taught not to want, a love that never had a chance to unfold, or a version of yourself that had to die just to survive in the environment you were given. And no one told you to grieve it, so you learned to suppress the ache instead. But what is ungrieved becomes immortal. It lives in your choices. It echoes in your loneliness. It surfaces in strange moments for no apparent reason. And when it is ignored long enough, it does not disappear. It demands attention through other means. That is why some pains return disguised as hunger. That is why some losses reappear as longing. And that is why some griefs shape your entire life until you finally dare to see them. Addiction does not mourn loudly. It mourns in repetition. It returns again and again to the same comfort, not because it is foolish, but because it is faithful. Faithful to a wound that was never honored. Faithful to a loss that was never spoken. Faithful to a sadness that never found a home. And here is the truth few will tell you. You cannot heal what you do not allow yourself to grieve. Growth begins not with willpower, but with mourning, with honesty, with letting the weight finally fall through you instead of pressing it into your bones. The habit is not what hurts you. The silence behind it is. And when you begin to feel that silence, you will understand why you reached for something instead of someone, why you chose sensation over sorrow, why you filled the empty with anything that could make it feel less hollow. This is not your failure. It is your unexpressed loss, still waiting to be seen. Not everything that shapes you lives in your memory. Some of it lives deeper, in your breath, in your reflexes, in the way your shoulders tighten when you feel misunderstood, in the way your stomach knots when you begin to hope, in the way your heart races when peace finally appears. Your body remembers what your mind was forced to forget. Long before you could make sense of the world, your nervous system was already learning how to survive it. It registered tone before language, atmosphere before explanation, tension before meaning, and it stored every sensation that felt unsafe, not as a story but as a pattern. This is why certain moments overwhelm you and you do not know why. Why a smell can undo you. Why a sound can unground you. Why intimacy can feel threatening even when you crave it. These reactions are not malfunctions. They are memories without pictures. What you call impulse is often your body reliving something it never finished feeling. And when pain is learned before it is understood, it does not fade with insight. It loops. It waits. It repeats itself through behavior, not thought, until you encounter the same emotional temperature again, and something inside you reacts before you can reason. This is why willpower fails you, because the part of you that is hurting does not speak your language. It speaks sensation. It does not reason. It braces. It does not plan. It protects. You may believe you choose your escapes freely, but many of them were chosen for you long before you could refuse. They were formed in moments when your body decided it would be safer to disappear than to be present. And once that decision becomes ritual, you call it a habit. But it is not habit. It is history. History written in muscle and nerve. History written in breath and heartbeat. History written in your fear of calm. Because calm was not always safe for you. And when the body learns that stillness brings danger, it will seek chaos with loyalty. It will create noise where silence feels like threat. It will generate craving where peace feels unfamiliar. Not because it hates you, but because it learned what kept you alive. Addiction is not your enemy. It is your nervous system asking to be understood. It is the echo of a self that learned how to endure without ever being held. And when you begin to listen to your body not as a traitor, but as a storyteller, something changes. You stop fighting your reactions, and you begin to hear where they came from. There comes a moment when the effort to pretend becomes heavier than the fear of being seen, when the personality you built to survive begins to suffocate you, when the voice you use in the world no longer sounds like yours, and the smile you learned to wear starts to ache more than crying ever could. This is spiritual exhaustion, not from believing too much, but from living as someone you are not. At some point, the soul refuses the costume, the role, the narrative that once protected you but now imprisons you. And it does not always refuse in words. It refuses through symptoms, through anxiety that comes from nowhere, through moods that shift without warning, through fatigue that no rest can heal, through a sense of being misaligned with your own life. You did not suddenly become broken. You became aware. The soul does not rebel politely. It pushes. It disrupts. It removes the comfort from what no longer serves you. It drains the pleasure from what once dulled your truth. It creates an unease that makes your current life feel too small for who you have become. And this is terrifying, because when the mask begins to crack, you fear what will be revealed underneath. And so you cling harder to what you know, to your habits, your identities, your escapes. But they begin to feel foreign, even hostile, like clothes that no longer fit your body. And still, a part of you keeps asking something you cannot ignore. Who would I be if I did not have to pretend? Who would I be if I did not have to perform for love? Who would I be if I did not have to earn the right to exist? And these questions burn more than any craving ever could. Because a craving asks for distraction. These questions ask for transformation. They threaten the version of you that was built for survival, the version of you that learned how to be acceptable, the version of you that learned how to disappear in plain sight. But the soul has no interest in acceptance if it costs you yourself. And so it begins to dismantle what no longer fits, slowly at first, then insistently, then through collapse, until one simple truth becomes impossible to deny. You cannot keep living as a character in your own life. And the moment you realize this, your addictions change tone. They feel heavier, less rewarding, almost desperate, because they sense the shift before you do. They know you are ready to leave. Not them, but the lie that created them. There is a kind of quiet that scares you more than any chaos ever could. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of exposure. The stillness where nothing distracts you from what you have been carrying. No noise, no performance, no escape. In that silence, you meet something unbearable at first, yourself. So you choose numbness instead, not because you want to disappear, but because disappearing feels safer than remembering. Numbness feels like calm when you have been overwhelmed too long. It feels like control when emotion once took over your body without warning. It feels like safety when attachment taught you that closeness leads to pain. And slowly, feeling nothing begins to feel wiser than feeling everything. But numbness is not peace. It is paralysis. It is the freeze response dressed in quiet clothing, the nervous system's last defense when fight and flight exhausted themselves. The body does not heal by going numb, it survives, and survival feels flat. The danger of numbness is not that it hurts, it is that it convinces you that you no longer can. You stop crying and you think you are strong. You stop caring and you think you are healed. You stop longing and you think you are free. But the absence of pain is not the presence of life. Emptiness is not stillness. And when you finally sit in silence, you notice it. The hollow, the blurred edge between days, the quiet hunger you cannot name. And this is when truth begins to feel dangerous again. Because truth reintroduces sensation. It brings heat into the frozen places. It wakes what was put to sleep for protection. To feel again is to risk again. To open is to remember. To return is to grieve. And so you choose numbness, not because you are weak, but because you are afraid of what awakening would cost you. But one day, numbness stops working. And that moment is sacred, because it is the first sign that your soul refuses to settle for survival. It wants to live. There is a question you avoid, not because you cannot answer it, but because you know exactly what it will dismantle if you try. It is not a casual question. It is not a philosophical puzzle. It is an identity earthquake. Who would you be without your escapes? Strip away the habits, the fantasies, the scrolling, the numbing, the chasing, the avoiding, the stimulation you use to stay half asleep in your own life. And what remains is not empty. It is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels dangerous. Because your escapes did not only protect you from pain, they protected you from discovering who you might have been if you had grown in safer soil. They built a self around your wounds, a version of you that could function, that could please, that could endure. Your addictions became your architecture. They shaped how you relate, how you cope, how you decide, how you survive discomfort. And without them, you are forced to stand in a body that no longer knows how to exist without anesthesia. This is why healing feels like losing yourself, because in a way, you are. You are losing the version of you that was born from fear. You are shedding the self that carried you through chaos. And grief returns again, not as sadness, but as disorientation. You start to wonder if your personality was ever real, or just practical. If your dreams were ever yours, or just distractions. If your habits were choices, or inherited strategies. And suddenly freedom does not feel light. It feels terrifying. Because autonomy means responsibility. Because awareness means discomfort. Because being alive without buffers means standing inside your emotions instead of around them. And here is the great irony. You thought your escapes were costing you your life, but they were giving you one small thing that truth now threatens to take away. Certainty, the safety of knowing who you are, even if who you are was unhappy. And so you hesitate, you stall, you bargain with change, not because you are resisting healing, but because you are mourning the loss of a self that kept you alive when you didn't know how to keep yourself. Growth is not gentle at first. It dismantles before it rebuilds. And that dismantling feels like dying. Because something is. If your suffering were truly about destruction, you would have ended long ago. But you did not. You stayed. You reached. You searched. You tried again in your own quiet way, even when you did not believe it would work. That alone reveals something about you. You are not trying to disappear. You are trying to arrive. Arrive somewhere safe inside yourself. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere real. Addiction is not a craving for ruin. It is a longing with no map, a hunger for relief that never learned its own name. You were not chasing pleasure. You were chasing rest. You were not seeking escape. You were seeking home. But without direction, longing becomes chaos. Without language, need becomes craving. Without safety, desire becomes desperate. This is why self-destruction is such a poor explanation for your behavior. It diminishes something sacred by calling it sick. It reduces a spiritual ache into a moral failure. It tells you that what you are feeling is wrong instead of unfinished. The soul does not seek pain. It seeks sensation. It seeks meaning. It seeks connection. When these are missing, the body becomes a compass without north, and it points you toward anything that resembles warmth, anything that feels like temporary belonging, anything that feels less empty than now. And sometimes, that warmth is poison. Not because you wanted poison, but because it was the only heat you could find in the cold. This is the great tragedy and the great hope hidden inside addiction. It contains a truth about you that refuses to die. It insists that you deserve more than survival, that you are meant for depth, that you are designed for more than repetition. And when you begin to see this, disgust transforms into grief. Shame turns into clarity. Judgment dissolves into recognition. You stop asking what is wrong with me, and you start asking what am I truly looking for? This is the question that ends loops. Not with force, with understanding. There is a loneliness that no room can erase, a silence that follows you into conversations, a distance you carry even when you are touched. It is the ache of being present without being known, of being surrounded without being met. This is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being unseen. You learned early how to be what others needed, how to adjust your tone, how to soften your truth, how to shape yourself into something acceptable, and that skill kept you alive in the world. But it cost you intimacy, because when you are loved for who you pretend to be, you are abandoned where you actually live, and addiction becomes the only place that does not ask you to perform, the only relationship that meets you where you are instead of where you should be. It offers relief without requirements, acceptance without exposure, a private place where you do not have to translate your pain. It is not intimacy, but it is proximity, close enough to forget yourself, distant enough to not be hurt. This is why you return to it even when it hurts you, because something in it still feels like home, like being held without explanation, like relief without effort. And when you finally name this loneliness, it changes. You begin to see that no substance, no habit, no escape can ever replace being met. You do not need rescue. You need recognition. You do not need distraction. You need connection. And not just with others, with yourself. The moment you learn to sit with your own experience without abandoning it, something softens. Something releases. The emptiness was not proof that you were broken. It was proof that you were unheard. If you imagined awakening as peace, this stage will confuse you, because nothing about it feels gentle at first. It does not arrive like light through a window. It arrives like fire through a structure. It does not soothe. It destabilizes. Awakening is not comfort. It is clarity. And clarity is ruthless. It removes illusions like skin. It tears down beliefs you needed to survive. It questions the story you told yourself when you did not know how else to live. And suddenly, the ground you trusted begins to move. You cannot unsee what you see. Once awareness rises, denial becomes impossible. What was tolerated now suffocates you. What once felt normal now feels unbearable. Relationships grow silent. Roles begin to crack. Careers feel hollow. Desires shift. Old joys lose their flavor, and it feels like failure, like loss, like collapse. But what is falling apart is not your life. It is your unconsciousness. Healing always begins as disruption, because truth cannot settle inside a lie without destroying it. And your identity, built for protection, was full of lies you needed to survive. Now you no longer do. So the body trembles. Emotions rise without permission. Tears come without story. The past steals your sleep. The future feels uncertain. And you begin to fear that something is wrong with you, but something is right. Very uncomfortable, very inconvenient, very real. Control dissolves at this stage because it cannot coexist with awareness, and losing control feels like losing yourself. But you are not losing yourself. You are losing the illusion that you ever had control. This is the heartbreak and the beauty of awakening. It pulls you apart not to punish you, but because you are ready to reassemble. There is a quiet moment that comes after collapse. Not immediately, not dramatically. It does not announce itself. It arrives like a change in temperature in a room you have been sitting in too long. You do not notice it until you realize you are breathing differently. This is the moment the soul stops negotiating. It stops trading truth for comfort. It stops bargaining with emptiness. It stops pretending that almost is enough. You wake up one day, and the old deals no longer tempt you. The habits still exist, but they no longer satisfy. The distractions still call, but not with the same voice. They feel distant, hollow, like echoes of a life that no longer belongs to you. And something else begins to guide you. Not excitement, integrity. A strange loyalty to what is real begins to form inside you. You are no longer interested in numbing what hurts. You want to know why it hurts. You begin choosing existence over anesthetic, honesty over ease, presence over performance. And it is not because you are strong. It is because you are done. Done with half-living, done with false peace, done with confusion disguised as comfort. Truth does not feel like a hero at this stage. It feels like responsibility, like weight, like standing in yourself without backup. But it also feels clean. For the first time, your suffering makes sense. And pain that makes sense is no longer control. It becomes information. The soul does not abandon pleasure. It abandons dependence on it. And slowly, you stop asking, how do I feel better? You start asking, how do I live honestly? That question changes everything. You were never escaping life. You were escaping the parts of yourself that no one taught you how to hold. The fear that had no language, the sadness that had no place, the anger that felt unsafe, the longing that had no witness. And you did not fail by running. You survived. Every escape was an attempt to stay alive inside a world that did not know how to meet you. Every distraction carried a signal. Every habit held a memory. Every craving whispered something you did not yet know how to hear. Now you do. And this moment is delicate, not because you are fragile, but because you are finally real. There is no return to numbness once you have tasted awareness, not because you are enlightened, but because something inside you refuses to trade life for silence ever again. You may still stumble. You may still reach for old comforts, but you will never reach in the same way. Your hunger has changed. It is no longer for relief. It is for truth. You are not broken. You are becoming. Becoming honest. Becoming awake. Becoming unedited. And this is not a finish line. It is a beginning. A relationship with yourself you were never allowed to have before. Sit with your pain instead of fighting it. Listen to your cravings instead of feeding them. Meet your fear instead of fleeing it. Because nothing inside you is asking to destroy you. Everything inside you is asking to be known. And when you finally allow that, something astonishing happens. You stop running. And in that stillness, you recognize yourself for the first time.